Brilliant child lawyer silences the judge, but what the judge does next leaves everyone speechless. Santiago Lopez entered the imposing courtroom of the 10th Civil Court of Mexico City with determined steps. He looked out of place among the seasoned lawyers in dark suits, exuding professionalism with their briefcases and serious expressions. In his simple white shirt, slightly wrinkled jeans, and worn-out sneakers, he immediately stood out. But Santiago was unfazed. He knew why he was here, and he knew that no one would take him seriously, at least not until he proved himself. His gaze swept over the attendees before landing on the judge's bench, where Judge Ramiro Castillo was already reviewing the day's schedule with a stern expression. When the case Martinez versus Ramirez was called, a tense silence fell over the room. The plaintiff's attorney stepped forward, the judge announced with his usual authority. Silence. Then Santiago stood up. The eyes of the attendees followed him in disbelief, murmurs already spreading through the courtroom. With calm steps, he approached the podium, clutching his canvas bag tightly. "My name is Santiago Lopez, and I represent my client, Señor Martinez," he declared firmly. A murmur rippled through the room. The judge, who had been flipping through his notes, suddenly paused, pushed his glasses down, and scrutinized Santiago with unhidden skepticism. "Excuse me, what did you just say?" Castillo asked mockingly. "You're the plaintiff's attorney." Suppressed laughter could be heard from the back rows. Santiago remained unfazed. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge leaned back, his gaze becoming even more piercing. "This must be a joke. Where is the real attorney? Or is this some kind of reality show?" A few lawyers burst into laughter, but at that moment Señor Martinez stood up and said calmly, "There is no other attorney, Your Honor. Santiago Lopez represents me, and I stand by that decision." The laughter stopped. Judge Castillo furrowed his brow, his distrust unmistakable. "Impossible. No one your age is an attorney. This is a courtroom, not a classroom." Santiago remained composed. He reached into his bag and pulled out a sealed envelope. "Here are my official accreditation documents," he explained calmly, handing them to the court clerk. The judge took the papers, scanned them with narrowed eyes, and fell silent. The room held its breath as the otherwise unshakable judge hesitated for a moment. The documents were real. Santiago was, in fact, a licensed attorney. Slowly, the judge let the papers sink onto the table and turned his gaze back to the boy. "Very well, Mr. Lopez," he said coolly. "Then prove it." Santiago took a deep breath, carefully placed his notes on the podium, and began to speak calmly. His voice was clear and assertive as he cited paragraphs from Mexican inheritance law and applied the relevant statutes to the Martinez versus Ramirez case. At first, skepticism still hung in the courtroom. Some attendees eyed him with distrust. The opposing lawyer curled his lips in a mocking smirk, and Judge Castillo observed him with crossed arms. But the longer Santiago spoke, the more the atmosphere shifted. He presented documents, pointed out flaws in the opposing arguments, and reinforced his statements with remarkable precision. Within minutes, the mockery disappeared from the faces in the room, replaced by focused attention. The opposing attorney, a seasoned man in his 40s, attempted to undermine Santiago's arguments. "That's impressive, kid," he said with a falsely friendly tone. "But do you even have enough experience to understand what you're talking about?" A soft chuckle spread through the room, but Santiago remained composed. "With all due respect, counselor," he replied smoothly, "experience is valuable, but competence is essential. So let's talk about the facts." Then he placed a document on the table, a key piece of evidence that shook the opposing argument. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The attorney hastily flipped through his own files, as his smug expression turned into a tense frown. Judge Castillo watched the proceedings with narrowed eyes. He was still struggling to accept that this young man was actually arguing on equal footing with seasoned jurists. But as Santiago confidently answered another tricky question without a single misstep, something began to shift. The judge slowly leaned back, ran a thoughtful hand over his chin, and gave the faintest of nods. For the first time that day, his gaze no longer held just skepticism, but something resembling respect. Santiago knew this was the decisive moment. With a firm voice, he delivered his closing arguments while the opposing lawyer grew increasingly nervous. Piece by piece, Santiago dismantled the opposing side's chain of evidence, refuted false claims, and pointed out inconsistencies with icy precision. His words were sharp as a blade, factual yet piercing. The courtroom listened in rapt silence. No one had expected such a young attorney to speak with such authority. Even Judge Castillo, who had been full of scorn at the beginning of the trial, now leaned slightly forward, seemingly captivated by Santiago's clear and logical reasoning. Then came the turning point. Santiago pulled out a document, a suppressed contract that the opposing side had dismissed as irrelevant. "This document irrefutably proves that my client's ownership claim is justified," Santiago stated as he placed the paper on the judge's bench. The silence in the courtroom was suffocating. The opposing lawyer frantically flipped through his documents, searching for a way to counter this unexpected development. But there was none. The evidence was undeniable. The tension in the room was almost tangible as Judge Castillo slowly scanned the document. Then he lifted his gaze and studied Santiago intently. The trial was drawing to a close. Judge Castillo closed his eyes for a brief moment, as if weighing his decision internally. Then he struck his gavel against the bench. "The court rules in favor of Señor Martinez," he declared firmly. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Then a wave of astonished murmurs spread through the room. Santiago had won the case. The opposing side was defeated. As the courtroom erupted into movement, Judge Castillo turned to Santiago once more. His gaze was no longer dismissive. It was thoughtful, almost respectful. "I underestimated you, Mr. Lopez," he said slowly. "But today, you have proven me wrong." After the verdict was announced, Santiago stood still for a moment, letting the judge's words echo in his mind. The case was won, and his client would finally receive what was rightfully his. But what happened next was something even Santiago hadn't expected. Judge Castillo, the same man who had mocked him at the start, slowly straightened and looked at him intently. Then, tapping his fingertips lightly on the judge's bench, as if carefully choosing his words, he spoke. "Mr. Lopez," he began, his voice now free of sarcasm, "I have seen many lawyers come and go in my career, but very few have impressed me the way you did today." A murmur spread through the courtroom as all eyes turned to Santiago. "I underestimated you. I believed your age was a weakness, but it turned out to be your greatest advantage," the judge continued. "You didn't just convince us with knowledge and logic, but with unwavering determination. You are not just a young lawyer, you are a brilliant lawyer." For a moment the room was completely silent. Then, unexpectedly, applause erupted throughout the courtroom. Some of the attorneys who had previously scoffed at Santiago now nodded in approval. Even the opposing lawyer stepped forward, extended his hand, and with an honest smile said, "Respect, kid. You proved me wrong today." Santiago took a deep breath. He hadn't just won a case. He had earned the respect and admiration of those in the room. Turning to his client, Martinez, he saw the man's eyes filled with tears as he placed a grateful hand on Santiago's shoulder. "Thank you, Santiago. I knew you could do it." The young lawyer smiled back, picked up his bag, and walked out of the courtroom with his head held high, ready for whatever the future held. This was just the beginning. That day, Santiago Lopez didn't just win a legal battle. He proved that talent, intelligence, and determination have no age limits. Despite the doubts and ridicule, he remained steadfast and fought for justice. His story is a testament to the fact that true greatness isn't measured in years, but in courage and perseverance. Do you think Santiago will go on to win even more extraordinary cases? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another inspiring story. Share this video with your friends and family to show that true talent knows no boundaries. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.